brought to you by Renegade River.
Welcome to the Renegade River Show. My name is Mike Hewitt, and today in the studio with us is our guest, Thomas Norton, who is a candidate for Michigan's 73rd House District. Welcome, Tom.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Hey, it's good to have you here. Tell me, let's dive right into your candidacy if we can this time. Tell me a little bit about your background.
My background, I have a degree in accounting and economics, a minor in constitutional history. I was in the military, infantry. I worked in S3, deployed to Afghanistan in 2011. Deployment that I worked very hard to stay on, and they were trying to get people to come home. I've worked in I-Caucus. I helped build a state organization. It's a people-ran, people-driven firm that gives the power back to people within an organization versus having the leadership tell them how to believe and who to endorse. They vote in order to endorse a candidate and then decide to work for them.
How long did you serve?
I'm still in the reserves,
Okay.
so I'm still serving. I enlisted in 2008 because I decided I would join the infantry before I was too old.
Okay, and you served in Afghanistan for one
I did one
year?
tour in Afghanistan.
Okay.
I did a little bit of an active tour on the Honor Guard down at Fort Benning.
Okay. Did you enjoy the military?
Yeah.
I see you've got a U.S. Army hat on.
Yes.
Very nice.
I couldn't find a good infantry one.
What school did you go to?
I went to Baker College out here in Muskegon, and I finished my degree on AIU online. So those were the two colleges that I went to. I graduated from Greenville schools in 2001, but I attended Cedar most of my elementary education through high school.
What causes you to want to be a state representative? Why are you running?
Because there's a lot of folks who go to run, and they have a good intent and good heart, but they don't have the issue knowledge base to go to Lansing and present the arguments to actually inflict change. Our state government's going in the right direction. We're much better off than when Granholm was in office. And there's a lot of things Snyder is doing that I don't agree with. And even as Republicans, we need to be able to stand up on our principles of reduction of government and be able to know what those issues are. So the cause to run is in order to reduce government and represent people on the basis of principle.
I have a tendency of not being a Governor Snyder supporter.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, I have to give the devil his due. We've got, what is it, $1 billion surplus right now?
Yes, but part of that's because he raised taxes and then moved money around much like Granholm did.
Okay, but that I'm not defending him.
Yeah.
But I'm saying when he took over, he had a pretty significant deficit.
Yes.
And now he's got a pretty significant surplus.
Yes.
Although I had to laugh when I was listening to that on the radio a week or two ago, because the conversation wasn't about lowering taxes. It was about, how do we blow this money? We've got this newfound surplus, and there must be places we can blow it. So the big fight in Lansing now isn't how to create a budget, it's who gets to spend it. Mm-hmm. What would you do with that $1 billion budget surplus they claim they have?
Reduce taxes to business, and I'd look at ways to reduce government regulations along with it in order to cut the budget further.
Why business and not people?
Because businesses, their tax system, they don't actually pay their taxes. They pass the cost back on to the consumer. It's a hidden tax. When you cut business taxes, the business owners reduce price. They reduce overhead costs. If they don't reduce price, they're going to reinvest the money at leaving the prices the same into their businesses to continue to grow, which creates more jobs.
But populist politics that, frankly, more than 50% of the electorate has bought into is that businesses are rich and therefore they should pay their fair share.
Then as representatives, we need to ask the simple question that Milton Friedman did. In what point in history has any economy ran by government ever succeeded in creating wealth for the people?
I'm trying to think of an example.
Milton Friedman asked that question a lot to college students.
Yeah.
Freedom creates jobs, economic and personal.
It reminds me of a different question. It was on an exam. Define the universe and give 3 examples.
Well, I think you beat me on that one.
Tell me, Medicaid expansion. How would you have voted on the Medicaid expansion? Okay, now that it's passed, even with your dissenting vote, I think when I did the math, we had 39% of our state legislators support it, Republican legislators. Yes. So roughly 39% joined with the Democrat Party and supported Medicaid expansion. I apologize. So it would seem to me, conventional wisdom, if you will, that 2/3 of our state government thinks this is a great idea. Why isn't it a great idea?
It's not a great idea because there's a couple fundamental problems with the expansion of Medicare. One, you have a government exchange that's at the federal level. Then you create a state exchange, which doubles the size of bureaucracy. The state government is looking at the amount of dollars they get for a small period of time. And those small period of time dollars go away in 2 or 3 years. So where are they going to make up this budget shortfall?
I was going to ask you exactly that.
Yeah, our state legislature doesn't look at long-term solutions. They look at short-term solutions. The only way to defeat Medicare expansion is to take it out in piecemeal. You've probably played chess before, haven't you?
You betcha.
Do you ever go right after the queen or the king, right out of the gate?
No, I'm.
If you're against a good player,
but there are some strategies that are a five or a 7-piece checkmate. But when we look at this, though, I think part of it is term limits. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
And it's kind of an ironic backwards flip that logic will do sometimes, because populism says we need term limits. But the problem with that is that nobody that has signed on to this debacle will still be in office when the $880 billion gift from the Obama administration runs dry.
What we need to do is go with the AGMA constitutional amendment that's out there to the state constitution. It extends term limits to 12 years, but enforces a part-time legislature. I know that he's backed off from the 12 years right now in order to get the part-time legislature passed. But the original amendment, it keeps representatives in office long enough to reap the ramifications of their hard diligence to...
Do you support term limits?
Yes.
Okay. The only reason I ask that, of course, I always find myself stuck in this debate, and we won't debate today, but when I look at our founders, and we wouldn't have half of them if we had term limits.
Correct.
They would have been moved back out to the farm, and that would have been the end of it. And I think to myself, first off, I always interpret the term limits as stop us before we vote again. and I just I reject that as being so much un-Americanism. And frankly, the byproduct of term limits is that it empowers the bureaucracy, which is exactly what I want to try to harness and slow down, is the bureaucracy. So those folks that are state government and union employees are really the people that are in charge of our government, not these people that are passing through and campaigning 50% of their time. What do you think?
Well, part-time legislature, it brings people back into their communities more consistently. And if they don't, the voters are going to get rid of them. The other part is it doesn't make it so as charming as a career. So you're going to get more servants out of it, people who actually want to represent their communities. By extending the term limits to the 12 years, you have folks that are going to be accountable for their actions. Because what does it say if they turn around and they vote for a bill that says this will take effect in 12 years? That says it's a bad bill. I'm not going to deal with the ramifications. And people have plenty of time from that point on to get rid of them if they're going to dodge that too big of a bullet. So by extending them, we have the public we got people who are going to come into the public service, commit to their communities, and then we can get rid of them if they're bad, and because we're going to know what they're doing. If we have the shorter term limits, it does what you're saying. It creates people who are like, let's pass this because I don't have to deal with the ramifications. But if we just double them, we can have a hybrid of both stances.
Why do you suppose the electorate doesn't get rid of the bad ones? Because something really outrageous has to happen to get the media's attention to then tell the public. And let me give you an example. Ted Kennedy, the guy murdered her. I don't care what people say. He murdered her.
Yes.
And he went on to serve many terms after he murdered her and sat on the bank and had a smoke to figure out what to do. I find that just flabbergasting, and I don't think that term limits will wipe up that, what I consider to be a character flaw in the American electorate, that those things are okay because politicians are rotten, but he gets us a lot of money.
How many representatives do you know that actually go into their communities and try to get their people involved?
I've known a few, but I've been involved for a long time. I'd probably say that the percentage is low. But listen, let me dovetail that a little bit. I know that Democrats and Republicans both have district hours. I've been going to district hours. Amanda Price, my own state representative, I've met her on several of her district hours. She holds them every month. And irony being what it is, everyone always says that these politicians are out of reach. But the reality of it is when I go to these district hours, whether it had been Arlen Meekoff, who's my state senator, there's 2 or 3 or 4 people there. And you would think that if there's really a disconnect, that the electorate would be piling into those things. And listen, these representatives, both House and Senate, most of them spend a lot of time saying, here's my district hours, I'm going to be at, such and such coffee shop from 8 until 10. Meet me there if you've got an issue. And nobody goes. But it's the same with the school boards. We all rag on the public school system, and then you go to the school board meeting, and there's nobody there.
It's a way the questions asked. Same thing with Milton Friedman, multitudes of other people, Benjamin Franklin, the way he asked questions. If I say, come and sit with me because if you have an issue, and let's address it. Okay, well, I don't have any issues. Why would I come there? But if I say, come and sit with me, let's have a conversation, you might get 3 or 4 more people to show up and start a thing. And sometimes it's how you ask the question to the people to get them involved. And sometimes, as a state representative, one of the things I intend on doing, and this comes from years of doing sales, is to be a district cable trainer, knocking doors, selling cable to folks. My intent is to, after I win this race, go out when I have time, knock doors, and actually randomly talk to people. You'll be surprised at how many people will become engaged from there because I'm going to take the extra steps to reach out to them. And that's what we have to do to re-engage people, to change the mentality. I can't fix the entire country, but I can at least fix a district.
Where are you on Common Core?
Completely opposed to Common Core. It's a direct assault on homeschooling parents. It's a direct assault on charter schools. It's a direct assault on parochial schools. And it is another way to sit there and social engineer education from point A to point B so that we can wipe out history.
It's a fascinating thing to me when I look at Common Core, or frankly when I look at the No Child Left Behind program that this was replacing. If you take Michigan as an example, you've got about a 25% college graduation rate in Michigan, and yet you've got well into the high 90% range of our high school curriculum that's geared for college preparatory courses. And then when I look to the vocational technical centers, it appears from the outside looking in, I don't want nobody shooting at me, but from the outside looking in, it looks like they say, okay, this guy skips a lot, or this girl skips a lot, or these people aren't academic, let's send them to the vocational technical center and get them out of our way. And I think, wait a minute, who's going to be tomorrow's electricians? Who's going to be our plumbers? Who's going to learn trades? So you get young Sally and John, and they've spent 13 formal years in public education, and they leave school without any marketable skills whatsoever. So as a trainer, to your point, as a trainer, I was also a trainer. I'd get a young person in and I'd have to train them. Before I could train them, I'd have to teach them how to learn, because up to that point they'd only been taught how to memorize until Friday's test in pursuit of government funding. So when I look at Common Core, it's just more of the same, but they get to sell billions of dollars more books at the expense of the public taxpayer. Am I wrong?
No.
So you'd have voted no.
Yes.
What would you have put in its place, though? Because we have to do something, and we clearly all agree.
What we do is we have to define around Proposal A. There's a couple candidates in the race that talk about school choice and say they're going to create a voucher system. But Proposal A is in the way on our state constitution. It says that the state government cannot give vouchers to go to parochial schools. It's in there. So in order to comply with the state constitution, we need to go to a tax rebate system and allow parents to send their kids anywhere they want, parochial, charter schools, and everything else. Be in line with the state constitution. Not just say I'm a constitutionalist and blow over the state constitution. Follow the rules of our society and go for the voucher system. Because there's no reason why inner city students and country students should not have the same opportunity. If you look at every school district where there is a charter school, a parochial school that is active, the education standard in both schools is higher. The quality of students that come out are higher. Cedar Springs Public Schools has an academy in that area. And that school has forced Cedar to, their test scores have increased. The students that I've trained out of that school have been much better students to learn, and they've been more prepped for the actual real world. They aren't completely taught to memorize. They have problem-solving tests that the school board has enforced. One of the school board members is a family member. He happens to be a Democrat. I don't agree with him on almost anything. But the way he educates is he believes on the board in taking students into prepping them for the real world and actually having challenging tests and everything else. And they might not weigh as an actual grade, but they sit there and help prep them to make decisions.
Would you advance a constitutional amendment state level to alter what was Prop A in a fashion to make this
Yes.
Constitutionally.
Yes, I would. For right now, we have to enforce the rules, though. And if these are the rules that guide me and I have to follow those rules, I'm going to work within my boundaries. If my hands are tied one thing, you open a window. If somebody slams the door, that's what you do.
No question about it. I have to tell you, if I were a parent with children in one of these failing schools, acknowledging your point about the state constitution and the limitations it places on my choices, I would do absolutely everything in my power to get my daughters or my sons out of those failing. To me, the competition still exists. As parents and as citizens, we still have the right to pick up our pieces and move on. There's no question that that's what I would do. But save that thought. We're going to go to a break. When we come back, if you got some comments to add, we will. But we're going to transition into what you think the role of government is. We'll be right back, folks.
Brought to you by Renegade River.
Welcome back to the Renegade River Show. I'm Mike Hewitt, and I'm in today with Thomas Norton, who is a candidate for Michigan's 73rd House District. Welcome back, Tom.
Thank you, Mike.
Listen, when we went to a break, we were talking about Common Core. Any more final comments on that?
Well, I was drawing schools as a point in case in point. And one school I wanted to point out to is Belding Public Schools, just outside of the district. But my wife went there. About 5 years ago, they opened Granton Academy. Belding was rated below Grand Rapids public school system in education when Granton opened. Today, they're still not great, but their system of rating for the state went from the bottom 23 percentile, and both schools are up in the low 40s, which in 5 years is a massive increase. And I just wanted to make that point because it goes to show how that type of competition of the charter schools that have been funded through the Great Lakes Education Project has really helped increase the quality of education through simple competition for students and parents.
I'm checking my email to see if there's any questions for you, and listeners will be happy to know that I have won $6 million from somebody's oil company in Nigeria.
That is called the Nigerian 719. If you get those emails, don't, because they're actually an international criminal organization that we've fought in multiple countries. Just so you know.
I don't think you and I have any disagreements on Common Core at all. So tell me, I'm still looking for the bump in the road here. Tell me your view. What is the role of government in America?
Get out of the way.
So government should get out of the way, period?
Government at each level.
Are you an anarchist with no government?
No. I'm cracking a little bit of a joke here. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin. There was multiple conversations that happened between all these men throughout the time of the founding of the country. I can't remember which one stated it off the top of my head right now, and usually I can, so it's a bad day. But they said that the United States was too vast, too large, with too many people for the federal government to sit there and make decisions for them, for all the people. So they created a republic. Each state, if you look at the original state constitutions, reduced it to the county level. Counties reduced it to the township. The most local base of government helps increase community involvement in government. The most local base of government helps make sure that everybody has the personal responsibility and some skin in the game. Government needs to be reduced. For instance, if you want to create jobs in Michigan, you can look at the EPA. We have a federal EPA, we have a state EPA, we have a county EPA. Cities have city EPAs. Well, as a state government, let's eradicate the state EPA, move it to the county level as being authorized through them. We can cut state cost, and the counties are going to operate that much better. Kent County is different from Muskegon. Not drastically, but ever so slightly. But I can tell you, Kent County is drastically different from Wayne County in type of thought and population makeup. So if we reduce government to the most local level, people are going to be more, my hope and my belief is that government will be more responsible. The state legislature should be there to kind of operate it so the counties can operate. The federal government should be there in order to defend the United States and enforce its constitutional roles.
What do you say to the people that, I'll use a real cliched argument, but I think it helps maybe shed some light on a difference. Not between you and I, but in America, a debate that's been raging for 70 years. Folks that would maintain that if the government didn't force you to save money with Social Security, you wouldn't save money, and therefore you become a ward of the state, totally dependent in your later years. In other words, government is wiser and you're not, so they're going to force you to save. What do you say to folks that truly believe that must be a role of government to do that?
If they really want that to be a role of government, they need to fight for a constitutional amendment, because that's the rules of our society. I don't agree with them at all. Prior to the Social Security Trust Fund, churches took care of the older folks. Families took care of the older folks. Every time government has gotten involved, it's broken down the core family. As we have broken down the core family, anybody watching can sit there and see the kids running around. I have seen soldiers that have served with me. There is a degradation there that is an assault by government to sit there and say, we know better than your parents. If we start getting out of the way and forcing parents to involve with their students more, they'll be involved more in their community. We'll have a greater society because people will have more drive. We have to let the natural order of a person's genetic makeup to take its natural course. Today, if we went into a major war with a country that could fight back, I can tell you that soldiers I've served with would run. Literally run. Because they will leave fellow soldiers, about a quarter of them. Worse than any other time in our history.
Let's put our radical hat on for a minute.
Shoot.
Do you think that America will ever find itself in another civil war?
That's up to the people in the society. If they stay disinvolved, there will come a point where government will go bankrupt. When government goes bankrupt, and the people who have lived off government quit getting food and lack of food is the quickest way to revolution.
There's two graphs. There's one graph that demonstrates that the poverty in the world has went up. If you look at the graph, I think it was from 1970 forward, but it went up at nearly a 45-degree angle, showing that poverty was becoming lower in the world in total. And so the way the article that I was reading had been written, it was a trumpet of capitalism. Capitalism works. Look at the poverty level in the world. It's easing with each decade dramatically. Mm-hmm. And I believe that's true, by the way. And then if you look at America's debt, and look at that graph for America's debt coming forward from 1970, it goes down, it goes up rather. America's debt has increased at almost the exact same angle as the world's poverty has decreased. Do you think that was do you think that wealth distribution has had a role in that, or no?
No. The reason why our debt has gone up because we spent about $17.6 trillion on the war on poverty, and we're losing miserably. If you look at the poverty standards from 1970 to today, you'll notice there's more people living in poverty than before the Great Society.
How much are we giving away in federal aid to countries around the world, do you know?
Oh, I think it's somewhere around $750 billion a year off the top of my head.
Approaching $1 trillion.
Yeah.
Last I saw the numbers, and you probably know better than I do on this point, but the last I saw the numbers, America had roughly 2 million soldier and civilian personnel stationed at a little more than 150 U.S. bases. Sorry, I'm saying that backwards. A little over 1,000 U.S. bases that are built on the soil of 150 sovereign nations.
Yes.
So when I look at the debt, and when I talk about world poverty, I have a difficult time extracting some of that from the conversation.
If they were going to reduce the size of military, what the government needs to do is look at regionalized deployability. We have the technology to do this. We could cut the military budget by reducing the size of bases, rework the agreements with countries instead of sitting there and paying them for the base, sit there and say, hey, if you want a U.S. military base there, then you need to allow us to be there with no charge, much like they did Britain for multiple years. There's countries like Djibouti, the Horn of Africa, very large military installation, joint force exercise. That country makes money off the soldiers going out on the town. They would leave that base there for free. We wouldn't have to fund them anymore, and we would have regionalized deployability. But we could close down 3/4 of the bases on that side of Africa. Close out most of the bases in North Africa, move into Italy, a safer, more friendly country.
Seems to me that a lot of those bases are left over from World War II and from the Cold War.
Yes.
And so these are wars that we're almost shadow boxing with ghosts, mm-hmm. at a tremendous expense. And listen, I'm a huge military hawk. Having said that, I want us to be able to defend our own borders, not somebody else's borders.
Yeah.
So I want the most powerful military in the world here in America, not somewhere in Africa or some country I cannot pronounce. Am I thinking wrong on that?
No, regionalized deployability brings more soldiers home, reduces the footprint around the world. It makes it so that we can have more impact if we have to go to war. Going to war is always the last option. And then our borders. Thomas Jefferson said a nation without borders is no nation at all.
I believe he's exactly right. In fact, I just recently wrote a really small piece on exactly that. What concerns me, though, is that even the conservatives on this point, and when I say even, I should back up a second. The reason a lot of this exists is because conservatives have been convinced that being conservative supporting the military, without asking, what are we doing with that support?
Being conservative is believing in your country, in my mind, in personal responsibility.
So nationalism is what the liberals would say you just said.
The liberals can say whatever they want.
There you go.
The liberals probably aren't going to vote for me.
You don't think so?
No. Guess what? There's 25% liberals in this country. About 60% of America identifies themselves as moderate conservative. I like my voting bloc.
It's funny that you say that, because one of the questions I had for you today was that it had always been a rule of thumb to call America center-right. And in the last 5 or 6 years, through Obama's fundamental transformation of America, there are a lot of folks that say he has transformed it to now being center-left. Is that true, or what do you think?
It's because the Republican Party is not presenting ideas. Look at some of the stuff I've said today. I'm certain I've probably presented a few ideas that other folks haven't actually. They're arguing the same arguments as I am, but they're not sitting there and coming up with solutions to the problem. If you never come up with the solutions and ideas based upon principle and logic, you have nothing for anybody to believe in. Because I can sit there and say, I oppose Obamacare all day long, but why? How am I going to get rid of Obamacare? Well, I'm going to chisel it down in piecemeal. I'm going to take those pieces off the chessboard.
You know what I find fascinating about Obamacare? I'll share with you real briefly, and then we'll transition to a couple other topics. But what I find fascinating about it, and I'm looking for your reply, is we're asking, in my mind, the wrong questions. And of course, I've said this on the show a lot, but we're paying on average for an in-hospital stay $9 for a individual single Motrin tablet and $6 for a cotton ball. And we've got almost all of America asking, how should we best pay for these things? And I go, what? Why are we trying to pay for a $9 Motrin tablet rather than saying, we're not paying $9 for some silly Motrin tablet? That's outrageous. And the example I've often given is if you went to the Ford store and you said, how much for the Ford Focus? And the salesman said, $5 million. You'd say, that's insane. I'm not paying $5 million for it. And he'd say, you're not. Don't worry about it. Because that's the situation we have with a third-party payer system, or Obama's what he's transitioning us towards, which is one payer or single payer. So what say you?
The biggest fundamental problem with Obamacare is the logic of government thinking that they can just set a random price and go with it. And Obamacare was written essentially by insurance lobbyists to force people to purchase health insurance. It has nothing to actually do with socialized messages, but more of what I would call a fascism of requiring you to purchase from certain companies. It'd be the same thing as me telling you to go to the Shell station. You have to go to Shell to buy your gas. Well, why do I? Because you have to. But the dollar amounts, if you look how government negotiates everything, they try to pay the highest amount to the highest bidder that they possibly can, instead of doing what businesses do and say, wait a second, I can go and buy this off the shelf. It's a logical mindset of government, which is a lack of logic. To sit there and say, hey, this is $9, I'm going to go buy this, instead of sitting there and going and paying $3.25 at Walgreens for their Motrin, walking in there and saying, hey, here's something that cost me 25 cents from the store. There's a bad mindset there where they don't want to question their dollars. And it's like, there's a guy who told me, and I heed to his advice still. He's a township supervisor in Oakfield Township, Greg Dean, great guy. It's not so much spending the money, it's questioning every dollar before you spent it. Because you are the steward with the people's money. I can't fundamentally answer everything with Obamacare. Just can't. But there is a basic logic that's wrong with government, that we're going to blow money without ever questioning it.
To me, it's really fundamental, easy. They don't care about the $9 Motrin tablet, whether it's the insurance or government, because neither of them are going to pay for it. We are. They're not a shepherd of their own money, they're a shepherd of ours, and that makes them a lot less focused on shepherding each dollar as if it were their own. Tell me this, though, first off, who's the current sitting state representative in your district?
Pete McGregor.
Is he a good guy?
He is. Pete, there's things that I disagree with Pete on, and there's things I agree with Pete on.
So he's a moderate, or is he a conservative, or what is he?
He's more of a moderate conservative.
Okay, so more moderate than you?
Yes.
Okay. The reason I'm asking you that is, would you be opposed to primarying if you had a state representative in your district that was just over the top, too liberal for you?
Yes.
You'd be opposed to primary?
Well, no, not opposed to primary. I would primary him.
You would primary him?
Yes, if he was too liberal.
So this guy's not over the top liberal?
No, he's not over the top liberal.
Okay.
Pete, when he makes decisions, tends to actually go to the community, talk to them, and then he makes decisions. And then he has good intent, and when I disagree with him, or he disagrees with people, even if they aren't the groups that helped him get elected, he will go and meet with them to explain why he did something. And those are the things I respect about Pete.
Kind of like Shirky, who came on this show to explain why he advanced Medicaid explosion. Listen, I don't agree with anything the man said, but I gave him huge kudos for actually not being one of those guys that pointed and blamed it on somebody else. Yeah. And he stepped up and said, yeah, I'll come on the show and tell you why I did it.
Well, yeah.
I don't agree, but he was honest.
Pete added an amendment to it that he sat there and what was his terminology? I polished a turd. That's what he said for Medicaid expansion, because he had an amendment that helped reduce it. And I sat there and I looked at Pete and I was like, you realize your amendment, you voted for it because your amendment got on there.
He voted no and then he voted yes.
Yeah, well, he voted no on the additional funding and yes on the expansion, and because he polished it and reduced it. And I looked at him and I was like, the problem with that, Pete, is that when it goes to the state senate, it doesn't matter your amendment being on there. They're probably going to remove it. And do you honestly think that the federal government, with how they're overreaching into states anyway, is going to care about your amendment? And after he thought about it for a few minutes, he's like, well, probably not.
If there were a state amendment proposal that caused it so that the state legislature, any law that was passed, would have to identify its funding. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yes.
So there's a constitutional amendment that demands that every law passed, if it's spending money, it must include a funding direction. So in other words, it would say, this is the constitutional, what we're relying on constitutionally to be able to pass this, and this is where the funding is going to come from. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Do you think that would tie him down a little bit?
I think it'd probably drastically slow down the state legislature, because then what they're going to have to do is explain why they're spending the money. They won't be able to hide it and shuffle it.
Yeah, see, that's one of the things I kind of get a kick out of when I listen to the media talk. Media loves to beat up on the concept of gridlock. I love gridlock. I think our founders purposely set up a system that would cause gridlock, because gridlock causes the government to slow down and not be reactionary, but to take action. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Am I thinking wrong?
No, I don't think you're thinking wrong at all. I mean, if you look at most of the founding fathers, there was the Federalist Papers and everything else. James Madison, as they were coming from the Articles of Confederation, because those had failed miserably, they moved to the U.S. Constitution in 1787, amended it in 1791. All of these guys continued in public service after the Constitution was written, because they were afraid of other people coming in and manipulating it. They were. So they wanted and they had conflict with each other the whole time. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. I mean, they ran against president each other. They started the political party issues that we're having. They wanted the conflict, as you're saying, to move us forward.
Listen, before we transition to a break, remember the one-word association games people would play?
Yes.
Where I say something, you got to think of one word that best defines for association. If I'm going to say Governor Snyder, what is the one word you'd use as an association when I say Governor Snyder?
Moderate.
Moderate. Okay. Folks, we're going to take a break and we will be right back.
Brought to you by Renegade River.
Muskegon.
Welcome back to the Renegade River Show. My name is Mike Hewitt, and we're in today with Thomas Norton, who's a candidate for Michigan's 73rd House District. But before we get back to the interview, just a couple quick announcements. First, and I'll say the first part that's maybe the more funnier, Monday through Friday, beginning tomorrow, I'll be sitting in for John here at 10:90 a.m. on the Talkin' Muskegon. And the part that's funny about that is I'm not a morning guy. So when they reached out to me, I thought, are you sure you want me there first thing in the morning? But we're going to be okay. I'm looking forward to doing that. I'll be Monday through Friday, Talkin' Muskegon, first thing in the morning right here. But beginning next week on Charter Cable's TV Main Street channel, the Renegade River Show will be on. Literally on TV, Charter Cable TV Main Street channel. It'll still be here at 1090 WKBZ AM in Michigan's News Talk Radio, but we'll be on YouTube like we're always. We're going to be on iHeart like always, but we'll be on cable TV. I'm really excited about that. Same time, noon to 1 o'clock on Sundays beginning next week, both radio and TV. So that's my step-in big announcement I wanted to get to before we ran out of time. So you're not opposed to, well, how about gun control? Do you want to control my gun rights?
I think it would be very hard-pressing to find somebody who supports the Second Amendment as much as me.
What do you say to the people that just unequivocally say guns kill?
Well, guns don't kill people, people kill people.
So when you look at Russia with very, very minimal guns, and their 5 times murder rate, you say, see, there you go.
Well, let me use Great Britain. My favorite's Great Britain. Great Britain's had pretty good gun control. They have armories where they got to go hunting, and the farmers can only have shotguns. They have only a couple hundred murder deaths a year, but you know that they have I think roughly per population, I think last year's number was about 48,000 people who died from stab wounds. People are going to kill people no matter what.
See, in Russia, they like blunt instruments. I mean, their big one over there is baseball bats and stuff like that.
Let me quote Joseph Stalin. One man with a gun can control 100 without one.
Absolutely. And
the point of the Second Amendment is not for hunting or anything else. The government should be scared of its people, not the people scared of its government. Freedom of speech is protected by the concept of the right to keep and bear arms. If you didn't have your right to keep and bear arms, what is to say that the government would not sit there and take away your free speech? And you're questioning what they're doing. This show couldn't exist if they sat there and you had a couple hundred people controlling that system.
Who was it that said something? I have to paraphrase because I didn't have time to find the quote exactly, but one of our founders said the Second Amendment won't matter until you need it. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a Jefferson quote, and he was really absolutely right. And it kind of goes to the Stalin quote, because everyone automatically wants to say hunting and go buy an air rifle and leave it alone. None of those things. There's nowhere in contemporary the world now, and there's nowhere in history where the rationale can be documented. But the irony to it is with the gun argument and looking overseas for examples, which is why I did that, is progressives absolutely love to look for overseas, to use somebody else's constitution somewhere, even on our Supreme Court, to rationalize things. But when it comes to gun control, they never want to look overseas for examples. They don't want to look to Eastern Europe or Western Europe. They don't want to look to Africa. They don't want to look anywhere, because the facts don't support their position.
Liberals don't like facts because it makes for very inconvenient truths.
Advanced carry, there was a little bit, as you know, coming into last year with the shooting in December of 2012 in Connecticut. Right up to that, there was legislation that had been put on Governor Snyder's desk that was seeking advanced carry or and it was an advanced carry amendment or law, a bill that was looking to be signed into law that would have loosened where people can carry their firearms at. You remember that?
Yes.
Tell me about it. Tell me how much of that you remember, because I'm drawing a year plus back. I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
That one, what it did is it really cut back on the registering of pistols. It cut back on the government's like X amount of guns before there's a flag on you and stuff like that. The state of Michigan does have some laws in place where, like, if I went out and purchased 10 guns this week, they'd sit there and like, why are you purchasing 10 guns? For a background check, primarily like pistols.
Well, I own a gun shop, and so I'm the person that most often in my shop, 100% of the time, am administering what's called Form 4473. That's the federal form. So it's your application. It lists your name, your address, asks you, have you ever been, found to be mentally incompetent, etc. I remember one fellow starts laughing. He checks no, and his wife hits him. Yes, you have. I think you're mentally. Anyway, that was
They
kind of
shouldn't.
a fun time.
The government just wants control of what people are doing.
You think this is about control?
Personally, yes.
Okay. So if you had your way, there'd be absolutely no government legislation,
The
no
only
laws whatsoever.
Well, the only people that shouldn't have guns are felons. I do support a criminal background check.
Okay. It feels like, let me give you some examples and just to get a feel for how your view is. It feels like, let me give you an example. If I called you in for a background check, if you had been Special Forces, and I can't back this up with data, I can only tell you what my experience has been in my shop. It feels like those people that have had Special Forces background find that they get delayed for a little bit further review.
They do, because the federal government has different things on there where they try to go under larger scrutiny, because those guys tend to have, if you have any combat trauma, a lot of guys either A, go off the deep end and the government thinks that they're protecting society from them going crazy, and the other guys quit shooting guns. And the federal government just has an additional regulation on anybody with a secret security clearance or higher for scrutiny. If I went and purchased a gun, I'd have additional scrutiny. I own a lot of antique rifles. I barely shoot anymore. Antique
being previous to 1898?
I got a couple of those, like World War II, World War I, Civil War, Spanish-American.
Government they don't think those are guns. So you could have a Gatling gun. That's okay. But you would have to ask for permission to buy a shotgun, even though Vice President thought it was a great idea.
Yeah.
Let's go back to education a little bit before we run out of time here. There's been a proposal floating around. I think it was sponsored by, in fact, my own state representative Amanda Price, that asked that would have called for a child not reading to a certain proficiency rate in the 3rd grade to be held back. I didn't support that because I felt that decision should be made between the school teacher and the parent to hold a child back. I think that's pretty significant to make a decision like that based on the development curve of some children at that age. What do you think? Would you have been able to support her bill?
No.
What was your reasoning?
Yours is pretty on for me, so I can't elaborate on too much. But the problem is, it's back to the same exact argument I had on Social Security. The more government gets involved in between the parents, the teachers, what's going on within core families, the less people will be involved. The lazier they'll become, the more they'll watch TV, the more they'll get on Facebook. I've seen parents that don't pay attention to their kids all day long, and they need to stop, turn around, and start paying attention to them. In the school system, that parent has a responsibility to their child, if they truly love and care about them, to be involved in their education so that child can advance farther than they did in life. That is the goal of a parent.
Yeah, when I helped raise my 4 daughters, what I believed was my function was to help my daughters become productive citizens that could be self-sufficient, that wouldn't have to depend on anybody but themselves. Now, all 4 of them are happily married. They have kids. I feel in that area very blessed, but I think it's because they were raised to be self-sufficient and not be forced to depend on somebody. So I don't think those things are happenstances. And frankly, I think it feels like 2 things. It's a double-edged sword because it feels like society wants to blame teachers, and I certainly don't subscribe to the logic that our educational drama in America, and it's a very negative drama in my view, but I don't think that's all the fault of teachers. I think it's the fault of some parents that say, there's the refrigerator, there's your computer, enjoy, by the way, I'll be back in a while. So that's a concern. But before we run out of time, tell me your take on illegal immigration.
The United States needs to go through and close the borders. We have terrorists that can come through the Canadian border, they can come through the Mexican border. It's very easy to cross either one of them. We need to build a fence and reform how immigration is taken care of. We right now we have a 7-year wait for legal immigrants. Let's fix the process. Let's build the fences and say, here's what we're going to do. You learn English, American history, you take a test, clear a background check, come in. If the city were to have walls, the walls would have doors, and the doors would be open to anybody with the perseverance to get there. That was Ronald Reagan's part of Ronald Reagan's farewell speech about the golden shining city on the hill, and it's one of the few speeches I first remember when I was a little kid. And it's not so much that we sit there and have to kick everybody out, but we have to make it so that they, I've lost the word, but kind of merge with our society, much like the Germans, the Italians, Irish, French. As we had immigrants coming in, they learned to be an American. They learned the history of the United States. They came here seeking the freedom. If our city is to have walls, let it have doors. And I do support the walls, to have those doors open with anybody with the perseverance to get here.
So you support legal immigration. But I got to tell you, one of the things you said, I just want to go back to for a moment because I agree. I think our current immigration law process is absolutely broken. And my story, for comparison, is a fellow that I belong to an organization with, a volunteer organization. He spent 18 years from the time he first made an application before he was able to be in America and transition from where he came from in South America to here. Did it all legally. 18 years is insane.
Yeah, that's why we need to reform that system. And then illegal immigrants, there's a key word in that, illegal. They go to the back of the line to get their citizenship because they came here the wrong way, period.
See, I got to tell you, in fact, I just recently engaged in a debate on Facebook, maybe you even saw it, on this topic, because I often, very callously maybe, refer to the illegal immigrants as it pertains to from South America as an insurgency. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to individuals, but when you're dealing with a wall of people that are in the many millions, last I saw the numbers, it was equivalent to the entire state of Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana combined that are here illegally. That's not a few immigrants that snuck across the border. I mean, we can hardly empty a stadium without an incident, but somehow people think that we can get 16 or 20,000 people per month for 30-some years to sneak across the border and nobody knows. And so with that kind of thought in mind, I think the government sent them. What do you think?
I don't think the government sent them. It's just another example why government shouldn't be in charge of it.
We're going to talk about it again. Folks, Tom, I appreciate you being on. Folks, I will see you next Sunday on the air here and on Charter Cable TV's Main Street channel.
Brought to you by Renegade River.
I think you beat me on that one.
Tell me, Medicaid expansion, how would you have voted on the Medicaid expansion? Okay, now that it's passed, even with your dissenting vote, I think when I did the math, we had 39% of our state legislators support it, Republican legislators. Yes. So roughly 39% joined with the Democrat Party and supported Medicaid expansion. I apologize. So it would seem to me, conventional wisdom, if you will, that 2/3 of our state government thinks this is a great idea. Why isn't it a great idea?
It's not a great idea because there's a couple fundamental problems with the expansion of Medicare. One, you have a government exchange that's at federal level, then you create a state exchange, which doubles the size of bureaucracy. The state government is looking at the amount of dollars they get for a small period of time. And those small period of time dollars go away in 2 or 3 years. So where are they going to make up this budget shortfall?
I was going to ask you exactly that.
Yeah, our state legislature doesn't look at long-term solutions. They look at short-term solutions. The only way to defeat Medicare expansion is to take it out in piecemeal. You've probably played chess before, haven't you?
You betcha.
Do you ever go right after the queen or the king, right out of the gate?
Nah,
If you're against a good player?
But there are some strategies that are a five or a 7-piece checkmate. But when we look at this, though, I think part of it is term limits. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
And it's kind of an ironic backwards flip that logic will do sometimes, because populism says we need term limits. But the problem with that is that nobody that has signed on to this debacle will still be in office when the $880 billion gift from the Obama administration runs dry.
What we need to do is go with the AGMA constitutional amendment that's out there to the state constitution. It extends term limits to 12 years. In economics, minor in constitutional history. I was in the military, infantry. I worked in S3, deployed to Afghanistan in 2011. Deployment that I worked very hard to stay on, and they were trying to get people to come home. I've worked in I-Caucus. I helped build a state organization. It's a people-ran, people-driven firm that gives the power back to people within an organization versus having the leadership tell them how to believe and who to endorse. They vote in order to endorse a candidate and then decide to work for them.
How long did you serve?
I'm still in the reserves.
Okay.
So I'm still serving. I enlisted in 2008 because I decided I would join the infantry before I was too old.
Okay, and you served in Afghanistan for one
I did one
year?
tour in Afghanistan.
Okay.
I did a little bit of an active tour on the Honor Guard down at Fort Benning.
Okay. Did you enjoy the military?
Yeah.
I see you've got a U.S. Army hat on.
Yes.
Very nice.
I couldn't find a good infantry one.
What school did you go to?
I went to Baker College out here in Muskegon, and I finished my degree on AIU online. So those were the two colleges that I went to. I graduated from Greenville schools in 2001. But I attended Cedar most of my elementary education through high school.
What causes you to want to be a state representative? Why are you running?
Because there's a lot of folks who go to run and they have a good intent and good heart, but they don't have the issue knowledge base to go to Lansing and present the arguments to actually inflict change. Our state government's going in the right direction. We're much better off than when Granholm was in office. And there's a lot of things Snyder is doing that I don't agree with. And even as Republicans, we need to be able to stand up on our principles of reduction of government and be able to know what those issues are. So the cause to run is in order to reduce government and represent people on the basis of principle.
I have a tendency of not.
But enforces a part-time legislature. I know that he's backed off from the 12 years right now in order to get the part-time legislature passed. But the original amendment, it keeps representatives in office long enough to reap the ramifications of their hard diligence to...
Do you support term limits?
Yes.
Okay. The only reason I ask that, of course, I always find myself stuck in this debate, and we won't debate today, but when I look at our founders, and we wouldn't have half of them if we had term limits.
Correct.
They would have been moved back out to the farm and that would have been the end of it. And I think to myself, first off, I always interpret the term limits as stop us before we vote again. and I just
Yes.
I reject that as being so much un-Americanism. And frankly, the byproduct of term limits is that it empowers the bureaucracy, which is exactly what I want to try to harness and slow down, is the bureaucracy. So those folks that are state government and union employees are really the people that are in charge of our government, not these people that are passing through and campaigning 50% of their time. What do you think?
Well, part-time legislature, it brings people back into their communities more consistently. And if they don't, the voters are going to get rid of them. The other part is it doesn't make it so as charming as a career. So you're going to get more servants out of it, people who actually want to represent their communities. By extending the term limits to the 12 years, you have folks that are going to be accountable for their actions. Because what does it say if they turn around and they vote for a bill that says this will take effect in 12 years? That says it's a bad bill. I'm not going to deal with the ramifications. And people have plenty of time from that point on to get rid of them if they're going to dodge that too big of a bullet. So by extending them, we have the public we got people who are going to come into the public service, commit to their communities, and then we can get rid of them if they're bad, and because we're going to know what they're doing. If we have the shorter term limits, it does what you're saying. It creates people who are like, let's pass it.
Brought to you by Renegade River.
Welcome to the Renegade River Show. My name is Mike Hewitt, and today in the studio with us is our guest, Thomas Norton, who is a candidate for Michigan's 73rd House District. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, it's good to have you here. Tell me, let's dive right into your candidacy if we can this time. Tell me a little bit about your background.
My background, I have a degree in accounting.
Being a Governor Snyder supporter. Having said that, I have to give the devil his due. We've got, what is it, $1 billion surplus right now?
Yes, but part of that's because he raised taxes and then moved money around much like Granholm did.
Okay, but that I'm not defending him.
Yeah. But
I'm saying when he took over, he had a pretty significant deficit.
Yes.
And now he's got a pretty significant surplus. Although I had to laugh when I was listening to that on the radio a week or two ago, because the conversation wasn't about lowering taxes. It was about, how do we blow this money? We've got this newfound surplus, and there must be places we can blow it. So the big fight in Lansing now isn't how to create a budget, it's who gets to spend it. What would you do with that $1 billion budget surplus they claim they have?
Reduce taxes to business, and I'd look at ways to reduce government regulations along with it in order to cut the budget further.
Why business and not people?
Because businesses, their tax system, they don't actually pay their taxes. They pass the cost back on to the consumer. It's a hidden tax. When you cut business taxes, the business owners reduce price. They reduce overhead costs. If they don't reduce price, they're going to reinvest the money at leaving the prices the same into their businesses to continue to grow, which creates more jobs.
But populist politics that, frankly, more than 50% of the electorate has bought into is that businesses are rich and therefore they should pay their fair share.
Then as representatives, we need to ask the simple question that Milton Friedman did. In what point in history has any economy ran by government ever succeeded in creating wealth for the people?
I'm trying to think of an example.
Milton Friedman asked that question a lot to college students.
Yeah.
Freedom creates jobs, economic and personal.
It reminds me of a different question. It was on an exam. Define the universe and give 3 examples.
Well, I think